Is Final Fantasy VII anime? This is a topic I've seen discussed before, and I felt it was a topic I should cover before going into my deep dive of the remake series. Before continuing with our question, however, we should first cover what anime is so we can be better informed when coming to our conclusion. Anime, in its simplest form, is simply a reference to animation. Any animation, no matter where it is created, is anime. It's a word specifically derived from the English word animation. However, in modern times, it is more likely that the word anime could be described as being only Japanese animation or animation that is directly made in a popular Japanese art style. Another catch-all way that anime is being used is for anything that simply looks anime. Games like Persona, the Tales series, Genshin Impact, basically every gacha game ever made, to be honest, a Doki Doki Literature Club, and the list goes on. This still leaves anime with a specific description, in that it has to be a Japanese animation or a form of media that mimics the art styles commonly used within Japanese animation. Recently, I found myself in a Twitter dispute over this very question, which I found to be quite entertaining, but not very enlightening. In this discussion, this individual lamented that Final Fantasy VII's shift to realism was an absurd downgrade in charm that they should have doubled down on the anime style. Then in the same post, they claim that Final Fantasy VII is in fact an anime game. I would dispute his claims, remarking that the game was inspired by anime art styles, but the game itself is not anime. Though you could make claims it is anime-like, even in his own post, he says that Final Fantasy VII is made in a realistic stylization. For a game made in 1997, it was definitely very realistic for the graphics at the time. Can we make claims that realistic graphics and styles are the same as anime? This is something I do not agree with. And while there are art styles called realistic anime, it starts to push the boundaries of what anime is. In his response, he claims the entire art style of Final Fantasy VII is stylized in anime and uses anime tropes. It is, in his words, Japanese media inspired by a Japanese art style. This is an interesting argument, and the main reason I wanted to make this video, though I cannot make claims against or for whether or not Final Fantasy VII uses anime tropes, as I have not watched enough anime, I can say with confidence that being inspired by something does not automatically mean that you are that something. The famous bullet trains of Japan once had the issue of making loud sonic booms when entering tunnels. Engineers discovered that by shaping the nose of the train to mimic the shape of the kingfisher's beak, not only solved this issue, but made the train faster and more efficient. Because the train's design was inspired by the kingfisher, does this make the train a kingfisher? Obviously not. Can we then make that same argument for Final Fantasy VII? The designs and style being inspired by anime of its time then make it anime. That simply being Japanese media inspired by Japanese art styles automatically makes it anime. I do not agree with this argument. I also disagree that being Japanese made makes your product more anime than others by virtue of you simply being Japanese. As we discussed earlier, anime is most commonly something made in Japanese animation, or something made that mimics the art styles of Japanese animation. While I may be wrong, I have never seen an anime that looks or resembles Final Fantasy VII's in-game, in-battle, or even cutscene art styles. It is a very unique style, especially for its time. It's not necessarily hyper-realistic, but it isn't really anime either. He then defines anime under one of the definitions we covered earlier, and then makes sweeping generalizations about me which can mostly be ignored. I do find it interesting, though, that the picture he shows here is of a manga called Vagabond. And it is here that we can start to see the backbone of his beliefs, which I call him out on in my response. He's trying to umbrella everything made in Japan by Japanese people as anime. To him, it is the core of Japanese stylized content, and should be used as an extremely broad brushstroke to label just about everything made in Japan as anime. He continues in his next post making similar claims, that whether something is realistic or not, simply being Japanese makes that content anime by virtue of its creator's lineage. That I live in denial for claiming that Final Fantasy VII is not anime. So in my response, I point out the contradictions in his original post, but also tell him a truth he doesn't want to hear, that not all Japanese media is anime. He then makes a couple claims. First, anime is a term used to define animations in Japan. As he mentions, Family Guy could be considered anime. This is our first definition we discussed, and under this definition, however, Final Fantasy VII is not an anime. Second, Japanese entertainment and pop culture is heavily inspired by anime aesthetics and tropes, that it is the core of their cultural arts. Everything made in Japan, from live-action TV shows to video games, is inspired or influenced by anime. This is the claim he is using as the basis for his argument. I'd like to first state that I don't know enough about the entirety of Japanese media or anime to disprove his claim. I can only say that I believe this is an absurd statement. While I can believe that many different games and shows may be inspired by anime, it's a very bold claim to group the entirety of Japan's cultural arts under anime. But this also flies in the face of our previous argument, that something being inspired by anime does not make it anime, any more than a train can be a bird. So I made a rather extreme post, using all the different examples he's given to proclaim that everything is anime. Lord of the Rings, Elden Ring, Genshin Impact, Expedition 33, Warcraft, Warhammer, even the American sitcom Friends are all anime. He didn't like this. But let's really consider the examples I gave. While Lord of the Rings books and movies can't be argued to be anime, there was a movie called The War of the Rohirrim that was made by a Japanese animation studio. It is, by two of his definitions given, an anime. Elden Ring, by his own examples of being a Japanese-made video game, is anime. Genshin Impact is heavily inspired by Japanese animation styles. He also considers an American show like Family Guy to be anime. A Chinese game inspired by anime art styles must fit the bill too, right? Expedition 33 is heavily inspired by Final Fantasy and JRPGs in general. The realistic art style is irrelevant according to his arguments. Simply being inspired by Japanese media, which he considers all of it to be anime, is enough to be considered anime. Warcraft has many different animated short movies made about it. Again, animation equals anime in his eyes, so Warcraft is now anime. Warhammer 40k is in a similar boat with shows like Hammer and Bolter. It's all anime. Friends isn't anime or anime inspired. I'm just a troll. His argument boils down to everything is anime, whether he likes it or not. And in my opinion, this is insulting to animators. It is not my attempt to put one craft over another, but animation is not an easy craft. It takes a very long time to do proper animation. Even at 24 frames per second, that's 24 handcrafted pieces of art per second. There are obviously tricks around this, such as separate background artworks and drawing character frames separately and then overlaying them to be a final picture. Some animators will literally just drag still images to replicate movement. But there are also animations that don't use these tricks. They take the time to draw every scene, in all of its greater detail, to create beautiful works of art. It's one of the reasons Japanese animation in particular has become so popular. It's the effort and time taken to produce beautiful shows with wonderful stories. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of anime shows and movies made by now, and not all are created equal, but I wouldn't think it fair to simply say that all things made in Japan, or simply inspired by the artwork of anime, is equal to anime. So is Final Fantasy VII anime? I don't believe it is. Games released near the time of Final Fantasy VII, like Chrono Trigger, Dragon Quest, and Xenogears, all have anime art styles used in their covers, in-game sprites, and associated artwork, but we don't see the same for Final Fantasy VII. Though you could make arguments for certain artwork, the sprites in-game, the character models in combat and cutscenes, and even the cover art do not resemble any anime art styles that I personally recognize. Final Fantasy VII simply has anime inspirations in its designs. The story of Final Fantasy VII was inspired by a famous duel from Japanese legend. Even Cloud and Sephiroth's character designs were inspired from this story. There are also many parts of the story and world design that are inspired from real-world events and locations. Even the idea for Shinra using up the lifestream was inspired by real-life environmental concerns surrounding fossil fuel usage. Inspiration can come from anywhere, and that's okay. Having your artwork be inspired by something does not make your work that something. The same is true for Final Fantasy VII and its anime inspirations. Final Fantasy VII is not anime, and that's okay. It is still very obviously inspired by the anime of its time in many ways, and that's pretty cool. Thanks for watching, everyone. Bye bye.